Located on the Pacific Ring of Fire, Japan has been shaped by geological movements over many millennia. The topography of its 6,852 islands with their rugged coastlines has been molded by the many volcanoes in the region. On the steep slopes that make up 70% of the land, nature is as wonderful as it is dangerous. Caught between the mountains and the sea, huddled along narrow strips of coastline, the Japanese population is at the mercy of the waves. As the world discovered during the 2011 tsunami, which led to the Fukushima nuclear disaster.
The wave had already swept over this anti-tidal barricade, and it was all over in about 4 minutes.
And it's not only tsunamis. There are typhoons, floods and mudslides too. On the coasts or in the mountains, water is a real threat here.
If you go outside, your life is in danger, so it's imperative to stay inside.
To protect themselves, the Japanese are battling the forces of nature head-on. In the north of the country, gigantic seawalls disfigure the coastline.
Japan is now being subjected to a concrete tsunami which is taking over from the real one.
Meanwhile, in Tokyo, the water is deflected through titanic structures.
Everybody considers this place to be like an underground temple.
At the cutting edge of scientific research, Japan has financed an extraordinary vessel. Researchers from around the world flock here to study underwater fault lines responsible for large tsunamis.
This has never been done before, not at this depth, at an active fault. That's why so much technology is deployed.
Accustomed to taming these raging waters for hundreds of years, even putting them to good use, the Japanese have put their faith in science and technology. In an era of climate change, their approach is a model of adaptability, but it's also a cautionary tale about the need to understand the limits. In the north of the country, Hokkaido is the wildest island of Japan. Daisetsuzan National Park boasts many active volcanoes, as majestic as they are threatening. Through living at their feet for hundreds of years, the Japanese have learned how to turn the threat into an advantage. They inspired a practice that is particularly close to Japanese hearts, the tradition of bathing.
There's usually more water flowing. An eruption must be on its way.
The water arrives here at a temperature of 42 degrees Celsius, heated directly by the Tokachi volcano, less than 7 kilometers away. Noriko has been coming here ever since she was a child. The locals share the upkeep of the pools.
Anybody can come here for free. There are many thermal baths in Japan, but I believe this is the easiest to come to because of its car park, even though it's in the middle of nature.
These natural hot springs are called onsens. Generally, they are operated by traditional inns, one of which is run by Noriko. Standing almost 2,000 meters above sea level, it is the highest onsen in the country. The hotel rooms do not have bathrooms. Guests, both male and female, bathe here in separate pools.
Before stepping into the onsen, you have to wash yourself using one of these showers.
The red water in the pool comes directly from the volcano.
It's really hot here. This onsen has a high percentage of iron. These are rocks that have been ejected from a volcanic eruption.
The Japanese believe that volcanic waters are therapeutic, capable of relieving a range of conditions, including pain and sprains. There are nearly 27,000 hot springs in Japan, and each offers its own specific properties.
Along with a high percentage of iron in these waters, there's also a lot of calcium and sodium. That's why this is called the beauty bath. There are many virtues to it.
In the past, hot springs have helped the Japanese to survive harsh winters. But this paradise comes at a price, because this beneficial water can also destroy everything in its path. This is a small spa town of Shirogane. Kitaro Yoshikawa works for a Sabo center created in 1943 by the government to make the slopes of the volcanoes and their rivers safe.
This place is what we call in Japan the white-bearded dragon. Many tourists come here. We need to think of the safety of the locals and the tourists if Mount Tokachi were to erupt.
Several dozen meters below, the river seems unthreatening to visitors. But the presence of the Tokachi volcano nearby can turn it into a devastating torrent, creating what is known as a lahar. A lahar is one of the most destructive phenomena to occur in volcanic regions. Rivers charged with ashes, rocks and debris can turn into extremely dense mud flows, destroying everything in their path. On the mountainside, a huge staircase was erected to allow people to escape the danger as quickly as possible. "286 steps, accessible in any weather, lead to an evacuation platform at more than 600 meters above sea level. To limit the destructive potential of the lahars, the Sabo Center of the region has built no fewer than 40 dams on the river at a cost of €350 million. This one, for example, with its vast iron jaws, makes it possible to filter the flow of water.
Violent mud and land flows, called lahars, produced by the eruptions, are known for their sheer number and force. They are so powerful that they can wipe out houses, bridges, and even railway tracks.
By coincidence, these developments created one of the wonders of Japan, the Blue Pond of Biei. Every day, thousands of tourists come to photograph its vibrant color, which varies according to the seasons. It is caused by the presence of colloidal aluminium, which reflects the light from the sky. Despite the risks they represent, hot springs are an asset to the region. Today, thanks to science, they have even made it possible to develop some surprising businesses. In the agricultural plain of Hokkaido, at the foot of volcanoes, where temperatures can drop to minus 30 degrees Celsius in winter, Hiroyuki Nakagawa has started growing tropical fruit.
It's around 28 degrees centigrade inside the greenhouse. And these are the mangoes. They'll grow this big in about 2 months, and then they'll be shipped out.
These mangoes will be ripe by Christmas, completely out of season. To achieve this, the farmer maintains a temperature of 25 degrees Celsius or over in the greenhouse by harnessing the hot water spring that gushes naturally on his land.
This is our system. The earth is heated by the underground thermal springs, and this, in turn, heats the greenhouse.
As these mangoes need cooler temperatures to flower, Hiroyuki stores snow in this large tank, which he uses to cool the greenhouse in summer. He can reverse the seasons by using almost exclusively renewable energies.
At first, it seemed a little risky to start the process in December, but there are many advantages. In December, there aren't any insects, so there's no need to use insecticides. On top of that, Hokkaido winters are very dry, which means that using pesticides to prevent mold, which arises with humidity, isn't necessary.
Hiroyuki's mangoes will be sold as end-of-year gifts and fetch between 100 and 250 euros each. It's a profitable business, one that the farmer hopes to develop with other fruits such as pineapple or lychee.
On the economic front, it has been difficult to work in the agricultural domain in winter in Hokkaido. This primary industry can produce employment in this region.
At the opposite end of the country to the south, the Okinawa archipelago is subject to very different but no less alarming conditions. With its heavenly beaches, Taketomi is a picture postcard island. It stands, however, on what is known locally as Typhoon Boulevard, where storms rage through at least 3 or 4 times a year between April and October. Like hurricanes or cyclones, typhoons are extremely violent storms. With winds of up to 360 kilometers per hour, accompanied by intense downpours, they develop over tropical oceans where water temperatures are greater than 26 degrees Celsius and the sea is deeper than 60 meters. They then head north, releasing their force when they come into contact with the land. Located close to the tropics, Taketomi is particularly affected by this phenomenon. On the roofs of the houses, grinning statuettes, half dog and half lion, seem to defy the natural elements. For hundreds of years, the inhabitants here have used them to ward off the anger of the gods. Kaji Kui knows all the secrets of this island and its traditions. He settled here as a potter some 20 years ago. But he is still taken aback by the violence of these tropical storms.
Typhoons are terrifying. The biggest one had gusts of over 80 meters per second. If you go outside, your life is in danger. So it's imperative to stay inside.
Typhoons are forecast several days in advance by the Meteorological Agency, and their trajectory is relatively predictable. So when a storm approaches, the craftsman closes all his shutters and hunkers down in his house. The architecture has been specially designed to cope with the violence of the elements, starting with the stone walls surrounding the houses. Their function is to deflect the wind upwards towards the roofs to preserve the facade and windows.
The height of the roof and the stone walls are designed to push the wind upwards when it hits the side of the house. Even the streets are built in a way that reduces damage. The streets make an S shape in order to stop gusts from picking up speed and strength, which happens when they're allowed to go in a straight line.
But the essential component of this anti-typhoon architecture is without question the 45-degree roof, typical of Okinawa homes. Right now, Kaji Kui is helping Miho, his apprentice, to build his house. It's an opportunity to teach her some traditional skills.
There were no craftsmen on this island, and I wanted to help these people. So that's what I did.
The craftspeople stack 3 layers of tiles, which they then seal with mortar.
It'll stay on the roof this way. If the tiles aren't layered, they simply fly off one by one because the wind creeps under them. I add some mortar in between the tiles to stop rain and wind from seeping through.
Concrete roofs, also waterproofed, are gradually replacing tiles. Miho and Kajikuyi are the last guardians of the ancient science that has allowed the Japanese to cope with this extreme weather. Typhoons are the most powerful weather hazards on Earth. But what if it were possible to harness their fearsome energy? That is the challenge being tackled by a Japanese engineer on a neighbouring island, where he is testing a prototype wind turbine capable of feeding off violent winds. Shocked by the Fukushima disaster in 2011, Shimizu came up with his novel idea as he pondered alternative energy sources that could be used instead of nuclear power.
I started my research because I wanted to understand why there was so little wind energy infrastructure in Japan. And that's when I found out that the country's environment isn't suitable for wind turbines. That's when I had the idea of creating a wind turbine appropriate for Japan, which meant removing the blades from the design.
During a typhoon, conventional wind turbines must be stopped or they will be destroyed. For this new wind turbine, the engineer uses cylinders able to turn on themselves. When struck by the wind, the whole structure moves in what is known as the Magnus effect.
It's the same as a free kick in football. If you put some spin on the ball will curve. When you spin the cylinder, the turbine turns.
Current testing of the prototype has already produced 5 gigawatts during a storm. This is nothing compared to the potential of a typhoon from which the energy could supply Japan with enough electricity for 50 years. But many problems remain to be solved, especially the issue of energy storage. While they may one day be regarded as a natural resource, right now typhoons cause a great deal of damage every year, especially in densely populated areas. Caught between the mountains and the sea, the majority of Japan's population is crammed along a narrow strip of coastline. The Tokyo Basin alone has 37 million inhabitants. 1/3 of the country's population is huddled into less than 2% of its territory. Widespread concreting has made the area particularly vulnerable to flooding. Many areas no longer have any fields or parkland to absorb floods. To solve this problem, the people of Tokyo have set up an extraordinary underground structure on the outskirts of the city. It is accessed through this small shack. When the region is hit by a typhoon or heavy downpour, excess water is channeled to this reservoir, which can store up to 670,000 cubic meters of water.
This area is 18 meters high, 78 meters wide, and 177 meters deep.
With its 59 columns, each weighing 500 tons, this architectural wonder looks like a temple. It has even become a tourist attraction.
Everybody considers this place to be like an underground temple.
On one of the columns, a sign marks the record reached by the water in 2015, a level of 10 meters. While these volumes are impressive, this columned hall is only the visible part of a much larger system. Upstream, a 6-kilometer channel drains water from rivers crossing the area. The channel has 5 tanks like this one.
This place is about 70 meters deep. A space shuttle could easily park here.
When the tanks are full, which happens about 10 times a year, the water is drained by pumping it out to sea down the nearby Edo River. Operations are carried out in this control room. Since the structure was built in 2006, damage caused by rainfall has fallen drastically.
The last typhoon to strike before 2006 flooded around 3,000 houses, whereas the next one hit only 200 houses. This shows that the system is working.
Unfortunately, even with such a sophisticated structure, it's impossible to eliminate flooding altogether.
It's estimated that there will be progressively more rain every year, which means that we need to build bigger canals and tanks. This will not, however, bring the flooded areas down to zero.
The upshot of global warming is that typhoons are becoming more and more violent every year, but that's not what worries the Japanese the most. Located at the meeting point of 4 tectonic plates, their archipelago is surrounded by underwater faults. Running nearly 900 kilometers to the south, the Nankai Fault is a particular worry for scientists. Sometime in the next 30 years, it is likely to cause a mega earthquake and a tsunami that is projected to kill nearly 270,000 people. Researchers from around the world come to study it. Marianne Conin is a geologist at the University of Nancy. With about 50 researchers of all nationalities, she is taking part in a unique expedition. Aboard this extraordinary ship, they hope to explore the previously inaccessible fault zone, more than 5 kilometers below the ocean floor. Standing 210 meters high and with a 122-meter high derrick, the Chikyu looks like an oil rig, but it is equipped with a high-tech scientific laboratory. Capable of drilling up to 7 kilometers beneath the sea, it costs the Japanese government nearly 500 million euros. Because of the many typhoons in the area, the ship can only drill for a few months a year. The expedition has just returned for its 10th and final expedition. They are 70 kilometers offshore in what scientists call a subduction zone.
Here we are at the point where 2 tectonic plates meet. Right below us is the Philippine plate, which passes beneath the Eurasian plate. Unfortunately, at the point where they meet, they are locked together, meaning there is no slippage between the 2 plates.
When plates are locked together in a subduction zone, the risk of an earthquake is high. The plates here usually advance at a rate of 4 centimeters per year. With no slippage, they accumulate extraordinary energy until the rock gives way, causing an earthquake. The moving plates displace a huge volume of water above. This causes a tsunami, which is not just a wave, but a temporary rise in sea level. By exploring the fault, scientists hope to understand why the plates are locked together and better explain how the phenomenon generates mega earthquakes and tsunamis.
So this is the heart of the drilling area.
Access to the fault is 2 kilometers down below the surface of the sea, where the wellhead drilled in previous years is located. the boat must remain completely static despite the powerful underwater currents.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah.
It's a real challenge.
Oh.
Then the drilling itself can begin. It is carried out using huge tubes assembled in 40-metre sections. The technicians propel muddy water through the tubes to dig out the earth and keep the well open, despite the strong pressure from the depths. The deeper the hole, the smaller the diameter, meaning it resembles a giant funnel. At the bottom, the tip will be only 17 centimetres across.
The area that we think is likely to shift and generate a mega-earthquake is something like 110,000 square kilometres, and we want to reach it with an opening of about 17 centimetres. So it will be like a tiny pinhead in this huge area that is likely to shift during a mega-earthquake.
So far, the expedition has reached more than 3 kilometres below the seabed. Fewer than 2 kilometres remain to reach the unexplored fault area. As the drilling progresses, the technicians pull up cores of sediment, samples that are often very revealing. Scientists are able to study them directly on board, thanks to the ship's huge laboratory equipped with state-of-the-art equipment. Professor Kanagawa, one of the scientific directors, coordinates the analysis, but simple observation of the samples already tells Marianne a great deal.
What we can see is that the material is all over the place, all churned up, as if someone had shaken the mud very hard. So what we see here is the result of a landslide that probably took place during the 1946 earthquake.
Drilling allows the researchers to go back in time. The further down they go, the more they find out about the distant past. The fault zone itself has never been explored before, and until now, scientists have had to make assumptions in their attempts to explain how it works. If they manage to complete their drilling, the 10 years of work will finally yield answers to their questions, and maybe more.
We'd like to install an observation device within the underground plate to be able to monitor it in the long run. Unfortunately, because the data is recorded in real time, it's hard for us to be able to predict earthquakes.
The work carried out on this incredible ship will undoubtedly allow better long-term forecasting of catastrophes and save many lives. But in the meantime, the Japanese must find ways to protect themselves. In the north of the country, the Tohoku region suffers tsunamis on average every 70 years. The exceptionally large one of 2011 completely devastated the coastline. To protect the population, the government has taken radical measures. Over stretches of several hundred kilometres, it is erecting a seawall to repel the waves. Rémi Scocimaro is a French geographer living in Japan. Since 2011, he has been visiting this region regularly to study the construction projects.
What we have here is an example of a harbour that remains a traditional fishing port. So the boats would go up along the shoreline, which has now been concreted over with the construction of a wall between 10 and 14 metres high, depending on the location. I call them the Pacific Walls.
Along nearly 450 kilometres of coastline, the Japanese are pouring concrete to surround the smallest of coves and the tiniest stream. Like this small river, which was inundated by the 2011 tsunami along a 1 kilometre stretch.
They're building a concrete belt around the riverbed, one more appropriate to the scale of a tsunami rather than the scale of the river.
But will this intensive concreting of the landscape be effective in repelling a new tsunami? While Japanese anti-earthquake measures are the most stringent in the world, engineers still struggle to provide adequate protection against gigantic tidal waves. In 2011, the tsunami killed nearly 18,000 people, compared with 300 lives claimed by the earthquake. A few dozen kilometers away, Taro was one of the first fishing villages to benefit from a giant seawall in the 1950s.
It was shown in all the school books and deemed to be the most effective anti-tsunami measure in Japan, and thus the most effective in the world.
And yet this massive seawall was not enough. The city was almost completely razed to the ground in 2011. Only this hotel remained standing. Minoru Obata witnessed what happened that day.
I'm opening.
Today, he is a volunteer guide, sharing his experiences.
The wave crashed through this hotel's wall, even on the third floor. It left this gaping hole on the side of the building.
When the tsunami warning sounded, Minoru jumped in his car and took refuge on high ground. But not everyone was so careful. According to him, that's partly because the seawall created a deceptive sense of security.
I remember thinking to myself, it'll only be a few meters high as usual, because there was a 10-meter anti-tsunami wall, and I went home reassured.
On that day, the high seawall prevented the local inhabitants from seeing the water withdrawing, a forewarning that another, much more dangerous wave was on its way.
About 5 minutes later, a 10-meter tsunami came, and a short while after that, it's hard to explain. But when the third wave hit, everything seemed to rise up. There was water everywhere outside the breakwater, up to about 16 meters high. Almost instantly, the water had passed the breakwater. Everything was calm again in the space of 4 minutes.
The seawall, the pride of the city, was submerged and partially destroyed. Worse, it trapped some residents by preventing the water from draining away. More than 100 people died. Yet a few years later, the municipality decided to rebuild a new, even bigger and higher wall.
The seawall was rebuilt. Only this time it wasn't 10 or 11 meters high, it was 15 meters high, completely cutting off the village, making it disappear from view behind a concrete wall.
So how did the engineers do their calculations, knowing that it is scientifically impossible to predict a tsunami, much less the height of its waves? At the old wall, now a historic monument, is Tsukasa Takeda, a local official responsible for supervising the works.
There was a lot of debate and many calculations in order to decide how high we should build it. This time, we are going to double the layers so that even if the tsunami is tall enough to go over the wall, it will still buy the inhabitants a bit more time to escape into the mountains or somewhere high up.
Statistically, this new wall will be able to withstand most tsunamis, But calculations only take into account the height of past waves. Today, scientists want to incorporate topography and distance measurements, pinpointing the starting point of earthquakes in order to establish more precise standards. In the meantime, the state continues to construct walls to show its support for vulnerable populations. Given the impending threat, it's difficult to oppose their measures.
There's no real limit to the construction of these sea walls because Japan has money, Japanese manufacturers are looking for new markets, and somewhere along the way, the moral dam has broken and Japan is being swamped by a concrete tsunami that's taking over from the real one.
As a precaution, however, the city has forbidden residents to settle just behind the new wall. Some municipalities in the region go even further. In Rikusentakata, a little further south along the coast, the Japanese have undertaken a monumental construction project. In addition to a wall, they have opted to raise the level of their city by several meters above sea level. It's an interesting area of study for geographers, because this type of planning is completely new.
We bring soil that has been dug up in the mountains on a conveyor belt and spread it out over there to raise the ground progressively. We've accomplished around 8 meters, which means there's another 2 to go.
Successfully completing this astonishing project will entail 300 trucks coming and going day and night for 10 years. The work will completely change the topography of the town, cutting down the surrounding mountains and raising the level of the plain.
The alternative was for people to stop living here, which would take away the commerce and kill the town. That would have been extremely regrettable.
Before the tsunami, there were around 5,000 people here, many of whom still own plots of land. The Japanese seem ready to make all the necessary sacrifices to preserve their living space. But isn't that what humanity expects in the face of climate change?
At first glance, it may seem a little disproportionate. On the other hand, you may regard these colossal facilities as an example of what can be done to repel tsunamis and protect against the rising seas, because more and more regions will become vulnerable to this risk. Maybe it's an approach that will gain in popularity and become widespread around the whole planet.
Global warming may well push us to one day take such extreme measures. In Japan, however, some are urging a different approach, one that would harness the forces of nature rather than struggle against them. This is the philosophy of some locals who have decided to resist the concrete tsunami. Less than 20 kilometers from the elevated city, it's possible to find a preserved natural landscape as it was before the tsunami and the reconstruction program. Shigeatsu Hatakeyama is a 75-year-old oyster farmer. He cultivates oysters in an environment that he strives to protect. In 2011, he almost lost everything.
For example, that tree over there, that dead pine tree. The land slid down into the water, along with houses and everything. Everything had disappeared.
Like most oyster farmers, despite everything, Shigeatsu revived his activity. A few months later, he had a huge surprise in store. His oysters were growing twice as fast as they were before. 8 years after the disaster, they are still an impressive size.
Oysters are the source of life.
At first, the health authorities feared radioactive contamination of the waters in the wake of the Fukushima power plant disaster. Fortunately, an investigation showed no trace. There is another explanation for this exceptional growth.
After the tsunami, Professor Tanaka from Kyoto University came to do some tests and check the plankton. That was when we found out that there was an explosion in the amount of plankton. I knew then that the sea had come back to life.
According to the oyster farmer, the tsunami that swept along the coast carried with it many nutrients beneficial to the growth of marine species. To confirm his theory, he bought a large tract of land by the sea, which he makes available to researchers. Masaru Tanaka, a biology professor at Kyoto University, has observed the rate at which life develops in the wake of a tsunami. These small fish, called gobies, had almost disappeared from the area before the disaster.
We don't eat these gobies, and they don't really have a purpose. But they're at the bottom of the food chain. They're food for birds and Japanese eels, which are now an endangered species.
According to the researcher, the tsunami has revived the food chain by restoring the circulation of micronutrients circulating naturally between land and sea.
Unfortunately, reconstruction is not an efficient reconstruction. All of the original land has been refilled. This is the only hectare of wetlands where most of the elements remain. It is really a place of great importance. The revival of nature after a natural disaster is surprisingly fast. Nature will always get better even after a disaster. It's important to know that and to be able to recover with it.
As a protective measure, it is sometimes possible to move dwellings up to a higher level or to improve the evacuation process. In Tokyo, some visionary entrepreneurs are looking even further ahead.
Will it fit?
Maybe if it was a bit smaller.
I don't think that's possible.
These men work for one of the largest construction companies in Japan. In their virtual reality headsets, they are viewing an astonishing idea for a completely autonomous floating city, a construction that would make it possible to escape cyclones and tsunamis.
It's a bit like standing on an island.
I see what you mean.
The kilometre-high city floats on a base some 3 kilometres in diameter and accommodates nearly 50,000 people.
A huge tower, where you'd live on the top, while in the centre you could grow vegetables, with a restaurant as well.
The high sea floats on a base some 3 kilometres in diameter and accommodates nearly 50,000 people.
A huge tower, where you'd live on the top, while in the centre you could grow vegetables, with a restaurant as well.
According to the designers who have already carried out tests on models, the inhabitants would be safer here than on the mainland.
Whether it be a typhoon or a tsunami, they smash into the walls like this. This means that it's safest to be on something large that floats. If there was a tsunami, you'd slowly float up and then back down again. Same concept with the wind. The green float is capable of using the wind's or waves' energy instead of simply being hit by it.
Right now, it sounds like science fiction. But the company is already working on smaller projects, with many countries having to deal with rising sea levels. Living in a country that has always had to deal with extreme land and the perils of water, the Japanese are taking the lead in showing how to cope with climate change. Perhaps their science will be able to solve some of the problems that threaten to affect us all in the near future.